Hello everyone, and for our second presentation today, I am absolutely delighted to introduce to you Victory Nwabu Ekeoma. And Victory is an Igbo-Irish writer. She's an artist and a content designer and a researcher. She was named as one of the 7 people shaping creativity in Ireland by District Magazine and One to Watch from the Irish Times and Hot Press and the Irish Independent. Victory has co-founded and edited the Split Milk magazine in Glasgow-based arts and literary magazine. But what she's here to speak to us about today is her work with Biazine, which she co-founded and edited. And Biazine, meaning Bia, from the Irish for food, but also the Igbo for come. So thinking about that space, in the Biazine magazine, it seeks to document our commonality, our counterbalance the mainstream food narratives, and to celebrate how immigrants and diasporas produce their own symbolic presence in Ireland through food. So I'm really excited about this, Victory, because you're going to be speaking about not only food, but also connecting with people and how that happens through your work with Biazine. Delighted to have you with us. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to get my presentation up first. Okay, fabulous. Okay. Thank you so much for the introduction, Jennifer. I'm going to start off with reading a poem by a contributor to issue 2 of Biazine. And then I'll get started. So, this is by Pelisa Bumwakwa. And it goes, "What joy and peace exists in one spoonful? The inconsistencies of measurement, the magic that happens when sorghum and water connect, the impatience and excitement when the bubbles form, the bowl and the final ingredients ready to go, the doubts and questioning if the taste will amount to mama's. Turning off the stove after 9 minutes, reassuring myself that another minute won't change anything, topped with butter, sugar, and milk. Nothing even matters anymore." Like I said, that was a piece by Pelisa Mwaka to Biazine issue 2, which came out in March 2024. And so today I just wanted to talk a little bit about what Biazine is. Jennifer would have given you a bit of an overview of what we do, what it is. But for some reason, I don't know why, maybe it's because it's about food, Biazine is often still misunderstood, I feel, in what it does and what it's about. And so I thought it would be good to kind of give you a bit of an overview of what it is that we are doing. So for me, first and foremost, Biazine is a storytelling project centered on immigration, food, and culture. People often call it a food magazine or a food, some people think it's a food blog. I don't know where they get that idea from. So Biazine is often considered to be these different things, a food magazine, and it's obvious why. I read a poem about food, clearly has something to do with food, and I'm not mad about it. If you want to call it a food magazine, it's up to you, it's whatever you want, but for me, it's so much more than that. And I'd like to just go through 4 things that I consider Biazine to be and why I think it's important that people understand this, especially as I've been invited into this space. At first I asked myself, why? Do we understand what Biazine is? Does it make sense for me to be in this space? And I thought about it and I said, yeah, I'm okay with being here. But I'd love to make sure that we are all aware of what this thing that I do is. Because it's important to me. It's important, I think, for the contributors because they understand what it is that they're contributing to. And I feel like not everyone gets it right. So first and foremost, Biazine is the personal cartography of a third culture kid. That is me. This is me. And I consider myself a third culture kid. It is one of those people who kind of sit here and there, a little bit everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I came here, my parents came here 24 years ago. I've only ever known Ireland, but I wasn't born in Ireland, and this cultural crisis ensues. I consider myself the paradox of experiences, the product of a paradox of experiences that are both enriching and slightly complicated. Home is an opaque concept to me. I've had to understand the culture and norms of, I've had to come to understand cultures and norms from different places really early and young, before I really even understood my culture, myself as a person. And so this thing happens that I call, or not even that I call, that Dr. Pauline Bross coined and calls ambiguous loss. And it's this sense, um, it's a sense of loss and grief that's intangible. It's kind of unclear. You don't know where it started. You don't know really where it stems from. You don't really know how to resolve it, but it exists. It just is something that exists. I'm going to read another poem from an artist and a poet in, again, this issue of the zine. And it is by Farheen. It's called Pulled at the Root, and it goes, an import, foreign, a pond of luxury from an unknown land, pulled at the root and transported, transformed, transfixed on identity. Who am I? A third culture kid, writing a eulogy for a land I cannot claim as my own, grieving a motherland that was never mine. There is a revelry to my sorrow, my inheritance is rage, a hedgerow between me and the world, a passenger to a history I cannot claim, and yet I desperately seek home. For me, as you heard in this poem, there's nothing about food in that. And so that's what Be a Zine is. Be a Zine is a little bit more than just talking about food. It's an exploration of, for me, my personal mapping of my identity against the backdrop of my parents' migration story. It's this sense of ambiguous loss. It's really common in kids like myself. Farheen, she lives in Belfast. She's of Pakistani origin. I had never met her before this scene, and she writes a poem that speaks exactly to an experience that I can resonate with. It's common across people like ourselves who've grown up here, who've grown up in different countries that are different to where our parents have grown up. And I decided that I wanted to explore this a little bit more, dig a little deeper into what this is. What is that sense of loss, and how can I understand it? And it's great that Alice is here, because Alice features in my presentation. Alice is great, and a big thing, I'm going to leave this slide up, but again, these are my parents. Came here 24 years ago, and that's me with them. And in 2022, I believe it was, I attended workshops. I attended the Family Lines exhibition. I participated in it. And this exhibition I was invited to kind of excavate family artifacts. And this exhibition sparked a series of conversations in my home about my parents' migration story. And these are conversations we had really never had. I had one conversation with my mum when I was 12. It was a very somber and very serious conversation on my 12th birthday, where she told me a tiny snippet of our story. And it was a really hard part of the story that I still I'm still processing, I suppose, now. But this conversation that we were able to have whenever I was looking through stuff to bring to the workshop that Erin and I and Alice did at the Douglas Hyde was very different. It was a conversation where we were going through photos, and I wanted to understand what was happening in these photos. And it's very hard. One of the things I learned, and I've learned a lot of things during this process of developing Be a Zine. One of the major things I learned is that it's so hard to get immigrant parents to tell you things. And I found that the way that I needed to do that was finding some sort of common ground, an easy entry point, I call it, into having this conversation. And that's why I have a zine about food. I always tell people I am not really interested in food. I don't make a food zine because I care that much about food. I make a food zine because it's easy access. We can all talk about food, and some of us can talk about it for days and months and years. Some of us, not, but we can all talk about food because we eat every day. We need to survive. And so it was an easy entry point. We're going through photos. I was looking at the photos. It's like, what's happening in this photo? Whose party is this? Oh, what is this that you have? I don't recognize this. Or do you still eat this? And then we start to have these conversations, and she starts to give me tidbits a little bit more, and I can jump off of that and be like, oh, who was that? Where did that happen? How did that happen? When did you stop talking to this person? Or what's your relationship like with this person? And so it continues. And so I decided to start Be a Zine because I was having these conversations, really entirely sparked by Alice's exhibition. So it's great that you guys got to hear about it first, because it contextualizes Be a Zine really well. And yeah, that's kind of how the project started. And what it has developed into is so much more than, again, like I say, so much more than just a food magazine. The first issue, there was a few recipes. The second issue, there's one, I think. It's really not, people are like, is it a cookbook? No, it doesn't include, it's not really about that. For me, it's about the excavation of memories and experiences and kind of giving that room for those experiences to exist. So I also consider Be a Zine to be narrative inquiry and an exploration of a radical arts practice. It's kind of a mouthful, but this is, again, what I consider it to be. And I think this is really important, somewhat to what is happening in this room and the conversations that are happening in this room, but also for me, because I'm in constant reflection of what is it that I'm doing, because it's so easy to kind of get lost and in the different descriptions that come at me and the different ways people interpret it. And I'm constantly reflecting. I've released 2.5, I call it, issues. And the first one was 2022, the second one was 2024, and I'm so sure the next one will be 2026 at this rate. But that's because I take a lot of time to reflect on what's happening and why it's happening and how it's happening. And so in my current state and stage of reflection, I'm thinking a little bit about how Be a Zine has been almost a form of research in a way. I've been personally writing a research proposal. I want to do more research into this idea of narrative inquiry and this idea of, so I'm a content designer. I design for a living. I design with the HSE. My background is in science and health, so this is what I do. And I'm really interested in human-centered design. So I'm really thinking a lot about stories and how they help us build empathy. But really what I love to think about more is how zines can be a really interesting way for us to it's a really interesting participatory storytelling technique. It's what I'm calling it right now. But really just using it as a tool for us to help people to share their stories as part of what I call democratizing art making. Like I said, I'm a scientist, I'm a health background. I have no entry point to the arts. I've always loved art. I loved my art teacher. I loved doing arts in school and all these different things. But I'm also Nigerian, and so I was going to be a scientist or something of the likes. I was really not going to be an artist. And I think that's, when Alice was saying that her parent or their parents really supported them in the arts, it did not happen like this in my house. I kind of accepted my fate and I went into the science. I'm in the arts, which is great, but I went into I went into science and I went into health. And so I went into science, went into health, but I've always had an interest in the arts. And I think for me, a big part of my practice now is making sure people recognize that the arts is for everyone. I don't know how everyone feels about that statement, but that's where I sit because it's for me. And I found myself here. Be a Zine is an arts project to me. It's a big arts project. And whenever I started it, a lot of people were like, I can't contribute to Be a Zine because I'm not an artist. And I was like, that's just it. Perfect. Let's start. This is where we're going to start. Making it a lot more accessible to people so that they feel that they are allowed to share their experiences. And like, I can work with that. We can work with that. You can start with a story, a poem, a photo. People just sent in like random photos of their parents cooking, and I was like, perfect, we'll work with this and create something really beautiful. But zines, really, really special and important tools for me. I've loved zines since I was 14, came across them on the deep dark web, and I've been hooked ever since. I started the first one in Glasgow, Spilt Milk, in 2017. It's defunct now because I'm no longer in Glasgow. But that was my first sort of physical zine and it was very guerrilla style DIY. We used all our printing credit for uni and printed throughout the paper that they had and put in our nice paper and printed, and it was really, really beautiful, and hand bound it, and it was a really gorgeous experience doing this. And if you do not know what zines are, just to kind of give you a little bit of a background on them, zines are self-published, small circulation, often non-profit books, papers, or websites. They usually deal with topics too controversial or niche for mainstream media, and they're presented in an unpolished layout and an unusual design. That's the definition by Ricky Mag, one of my first ever sort of zines, online zines that I ever interacted with. Historically, zines have been an underground way for marginalized communities to record their stories, share information, and organize. And they're characterized by a DIY ethos and rebellious nature, free from corporate editors or publishers. And that is what I absolutely adore about them. And I think that they are one of the most beautiful tools to use, especially when you're working with people from marginalized communities or backgrounds, because what I found, I host workshops, and what I found people is that you give people a bunch of paper and collage material and pens and tell them make a zine, and they look at you like, what's going on? First of all, I don't know what it is. Second of all, I'm not creative. That statement, I can't do it. And by the end, every single time without fail of doing a zine workshop, everyone produces something. That the last workshop I did, which was with the Hugh Lane Gallery with their Make and Be program, we left crying. We were all in tears. It was really beautiful. And this happens every single time we leave with a really profound, just really profound experience, because you're taking something that is so, like, literally you tell people how to fold paper, and that takes like an hour to teach people how to fold the paper. And then they get into the work and they produce something absolutely stunning that reflects their experience from found material. And I love it. And I think it's so beautiful to use. That's one of the workshops that I did with the Hugh Lane that I have been doing since the start of this year, which has been really fun. And we've been doing this with people from of African origin, or people specifically working with people in direct provision, people who've just come to the country, and this has been really nice for them and for us. People who've always had an interest in art but never would have walked into the Hugh Lane Gallery on a normal day. And that was really great. And so I'm very passionate about zines. This is why Be a Zine is a Be a Zine, and people call it magazine, and I'm okay with that. It's not the end of the world to me. But it's a zine. Like, this is where it's situated. This is where it finds itself as a zine. And so, yeah, I call that the radical arts practice, because I think zines are radical in both as an adjective, as a noun. I think that they are very, very cool. I think a lot of people don't use it enough, or don't recognize or know about it enough, and it could be used so much more in schools. And I'm really excited because I get to do that next year with super projects. But also just to be able to use them with communities that kind of find it, that have complicated experiences, I feel. They kind of find it hard to figure out how to speak and voice those experiences. Zines somehow, some way, help people do that, and I love it. It's always fascinating to me. Another thing about Be a Zine is that it doesn't have a theme. It's about food, but there's no theme. People say, what's the theme? What do I submit? And I say, whatever you want. As long as it's about food, as long as you are a person of color and you are an immigrant in this country, or have sort of a migrant diasporic background, then you can submit anything you want. And even if it's not about food, as long as it's about food, culture, immigration, and that kind of experience, you're welcome. I'll find a space. And I feel with Be a Zine, it's become this kind of inductive approach where I get all this material. I get a lot of material, and I sit with it. I'm only one person, I do it by myself. And I sit with all this material, and I find the narrative that threads through it. Again, I'm going back to the zine. I'm going to try and see if I can read them all. But with this issue specifically, it was such a beautiful experience because we had an unprecedented amount of submissions. There's 40 contributors in this, all from immigrant backgrounds, people of color across the whole country. And when they gave me their stuff, I had to go through it, and I was like, okay, where do we start? How do we start? And it was just sorting. It was just like putting them into groups, figuring out what is the story that this zine is going to tell. And I figured that the zine, or as I did that, I came to see the zine, it tells its own story. It says what it wants to say. I don't really tell it what to do. So this zine, I say, based off of the stories. And I have some copies, and hopefully you guys will be able to read them and or buy if you want. But I do have some copies, and you'll be able to see visually how it maps out, but I'm going to try and recite it to you. So Be a Zine is for, and under these sections are several art pieces, poems, or whatever that fit with the theme. It's for our, in brackets, grandparents. It's for their sacrifice. Be a Zine is for their children. It's for our longing for home. It's for mixed cultures. It's for the paths that they forge. Be a Zine is for the parents who taught us, and it's for the recipes we didn't learn. Be a Zine is dedicated to the food that we love, and it's dedicated to the people that we share it with. And when you go through the zine, you will see how these stories speak to each other. It's the most fascinating thing. It's been the most fascinating thing for me that people from disparate backgrounds, so many different cultures, their experiences are so similar. They're speaking to each other. I have stories where someone is saying how a mother sent in a piece, and she was saying how she teaches her child discipline through food and cooking. And then this other person, she was from, I believe, Southern Africa. And then another person who's from Vietnam sent in their piece, and they're saying how my mother taught me how to be disciplined through cooking. And it's two completely different people, such a similar experience. It's fascinating. So that's one thing with being in its narrative. It takes this sort of narrative inquiry approach. It takes this approach that says, let the pieces speak for themselves. And it uses zines, which I think is radical. And then the last two, Be a Zine is a safe space for minoritized ethnicities. I say minoritized because these people that we are talking as minority ethnic people, we are part of the global majority. We exist, there's a lot of us, but in these spaces, in these countries that we come to, we are often minoritized. But Be a Zine is and I have it in quotes, safe space. I have it in quotes because we can talk about safe spaces, accountable spaces, and all the different types of spaces. But for me, at the core of what Be a Zine is that it is for us, by us, and I'm so strict about this. If you are not an immigrant of color, I'm sorry, you can't submit to the zine. And I mean this with all respect. And it's really funny and beautiful because our audience is the people that really support this are people who are not from our communities. And I love this because I love that you guys and other people get to interact with this and see these stories. And sometimes they come in, like, again, people think it's a food magazine. Sometimes they come in thinking it's Food and Wine Ireland and they buy the zine. And I'm like, gotcha, like you're going to see something else and you're going to read a very difficult poem, but you know what, at least you learned something today, and I'm so happy about that. But ultimately it's a safe space for minoritized ethnic people and minoritized ethnicities. It's a space that's crucial for us to sort of resist, in a way, resist oppression, resist whatever it is that we are resisting in our daily lives. It's essential because it helps us heal, helps us reclaim parts of ourselves that have been repressed. This is so important to me. It helps us redefine ourselves, and it helps us support one another in embracing who we are. And that's what Be a Zine is. These are pictures from the 2 launch party events that we've through. These are 2 of the contributors. These are friends and family and people from the public who came to support us. And joy. It's beautiful. It's so nice to have us in these spaces. And I also have here part of our ethos of creating things that help us to feel safe. We've recently created lunch bags, if you can't tell. And this is another part of just, again, to explain it before, it's beautiful, but to explain it, it says, what's that? And it's a lunchbox with eggs and very random things in there, or say random, quote unquote random. But for me, creating this was creating something that allowed us to have dialogue off the bat, allowed us to feel like we did not have to hide behind the sense of like my food smells, or I'm uncomfortable bringing it into spaces. And that's what BIA does. It's constantly challenging people to like rethink how we interact with immigrants and our food and our culture, and by extension us. But ultimately, it creates a safety for immigrants to feel like they can share those things. And lastly, that's a lot. Museum is a living archive. It's a living archive honoring the embodied experiences of immigrants in Ireland. And just to kind of give you a background of what that means, the living archive, it's a dynamic concept. It kind of blurs the line between past traditions, present experiences. It intertwines cultural heritage preservation with interactive engagement, and the embodied experiences, the way individuals perceive and engage with the world through their physical bodies, highlighting the connection between sensory experiences and personal identity. Perfect for this idea of food, sensory experiences, and the things that we do that we don't even know that we do. I cook and interact with food in a certain way because of the way my mom, this thing that just happens that I didn't even know consciously was happening. And the way that we create this living archive and honor the embodied experience is, first and foremost, I invite immigrants to excavate their memories around food. This is an entry point. Like I said at the start, it's hard to kind of get people to, when I say food, what you read in the zine is so varied. You have people who kind of just talk about their porridge that they love, like the first poem I write, and then you have some people talking about the grief that they experience because they're not connected to home. It varies, but food was how we started this conversation. So we created this opening and entry point into excavating memories and experiences. And then I encourage people to contextualize those memories in their present experiences. That's why it's about immigrants here in Ireland now. Yes, we've got stories from people who've kind of come and left Ireland, but it's really for immigrants here in Ireland in this present moment, in this like here and now. And then the last thing that we do to kind of create this living archive, if you will, is that we invite people to respond to this work. And so this is what happens with the events. This is what happens with zine make. I do these zine making workshops. We talk about food and it's responding. It's what happens when I read poems from the scene to a group of people like you, and I invite you to respond. I go to art book fairs and I sit at a stall. I'm going to Cork tomorrow for the first time in my life. I'm very nervous to go all the way down there. But I'm going to sit at this fair and I'm going to sit there for hours, and people are going to talk to me and I'm going to engage and they're going to respond to this thing that I'm doing. And I've been to Australia and I've been to Hamburg and I've had people sit and respond to this thing that's happening here in Ireland with immigrants. And then we document that, and it creates, again, this living archive. It's constantly just happening and moving and it's ongoing. And it's so important to do this because this contributes to us as immigrants building these bonds, this community, and ultimately kind of understanding and negotiating and navigating this identity that we exist, especially kids like me. My zine is for every sort of immigrant, no matter where, people who've just come, people who've been here forever. But me specifically, I'm here. I'm Irish. This specific experience of being a third culture kid where I'm Irish Nigerian, and in Ireland I'm not Irish enough, Nigeria I'm not Nigerian enough, that experience is very specific to me, and it's been such a comfort to have this, to just tease it out and to find community and people who understand that. So yeah, that's kind of it. These are photos that we took that you'll find in the zine if you manage to grab a copy. But just to kind of conclude and finish off, for me, when I think of the zine and sort of where I'm going with it, people always ask, what's next for Be a Zine? And I honestly am like, I don't know, really. I can't tell you. All I know is that it's evolving. What it was when I released the first issue, it's called issue 00, because I was not planning to have first, second, third, or fourth issue. I was like, I'm just going to give you guys this and give me the space to decide if I want to do this or not in the future. The response was overwhelming, and it's here, and hopefully it's here to stay at my pace for definitely, but hopefully here to stay. But for me, it's really important, and the hopes that I have with this project is that people like myself would feel validated, voiced, and affirmed in their experiences here in Ireland. I'm hoping that as a sort of research work, because I do feel like it is some sort of archival research work, that it continues to kind of advocate for more participatory research and design, and using different kind of innovative arts methods like zines. Please use zines if you don't already. And lastly, I think one of the big things for me that I'm constantly thinking of is this idea of the living archive and safe space, and how they both interact. And the things that are on my heart and that I'm dreaming of right now in my brain is, how do we work towards permanent spaces as immigrants, instead of repeatedly kind of getting trapped in temporary spaces, where the value of our communities is captured a little bit and kind of extracted in a sense. People kind of invite us in, then they get to say that they hosted us, and then it looks great for their websites, and it doesn't feel great for us sometimes. And how do we kind of work towards those spaces? And how do we also work towards spaces where this living archive can grow? Permanent spaces I'm talking about as well, where this living archive can grow, where we can preserve in the moment responses that allows reflections of the past to converge with the vital expressions of current sentiment. Those are the things that I'm thinking of, and I'm working on it, and I'm exploring how that looks. And I'm really grateful that I get to do things where I get to go into schools or work with the Hugh Lane. That's been such a beautiful experience. It's also been the first time I've worked with very young people. That's been very interesting. But it's been great because zines and that culture and that ethos and that thing is for everyone across all ages. And I'd love for us to have more things like Be a Zine. If Be a Zine ceases to exist, I hope something else takes its place, replaces it, and it's absolutely better than what it is, because my people in my community need it. There's 40 people in here that needed it, and there was much more that contributed. I'm just one person, not everyone. And there's so much more people that will need it in the future. This country is changing, and there are kids that are growing up that are going to experience the things I experienced when I was a kid, the kind of internal crisis. And how do we help them? How do we get them to work through that in safe ways, in ways that doesn't diminish who they are, but reminds them that who they are is, this is okay, and we're okay with this, and we will help you to flourish, I think is the word. I'm going to leave it there.
Sincere thanks, Victory. I really enjoyed your presentation, and I have to put my hand up and say that I thought that there was more of a food emphasis than I realized. So thank you for that, and I really look forward to my issue coming through today. But one of the things that I think has been so powerful about the work that you have shared with us is that choice of something such as food that is both a useful tool, and how you spoke about that and how you've used that within your own family dynamic, and exploring and excavating your dynamic with your family and your mother, and it used as a tool and a safe space in some way to work from. Can you maybe speak to that in terms of your contributors, how that has worked for them in terms of how they've contributed to your magazine?
Yeah.
Zine, excuse me.
You're excused. Yeah, with the contributors, I think it's been really interesting. When we get in submissions, they vary. They're so, like, the breadth of them is really, really wide. And when I speak to them, whenever I get back to them, whenever I see them at these events, I have the sort of privilege of hearing how, for them, this has been healing, and being able to share these experiences and being able to find community. What you find, so there was a photo of two contributors there who they connected through this project. One lives in the UK and one lives here in Ireland, and then they ended up going to Italy together to do like a food residency. And it's just, there's this like beautiful sort of convergence that happens, because again, like I said, that there was a dialogue that's happening between the pieces. I was at the launch party. There was this, I think it was really interesting to see them. I was frazzled because throwing a party is crazy, but I could see people like being like, you're the artist that's associated with my work, and this work is the same as mine. And then these friendships are being born between people from different cultures. And so I suppose anecdotally, I know that contributors are in a large way experiencing and having that kind of the experience that I had when I did that first issue. I always say that the first issue was a public exploration of private matters, to be honest, because it was my public exploration of me figuring out who I am and allowing people to be part of that. And I wasn't so I was cool with the idea that people were contributing to it, but I think there was only like 6 contributors in the first issue, so that's so different to 40. But it's just the resonance that had with them. And I know that in this issue, like there is this just deep resonance, like going through that narrative that goes through the zine. Like you can see, it's only towards the end that we're even starting to talk about the foods we love and things like this. First three quarters of the zine is like family, home, who am I, identity, the things my parents gave me, the things that they didn't give me, and how that kind of makes us feel. And yeah, I don't know. I think that's kind of, I think the contributors are experiencing and are able to connect to the same sort of exploration that I was able to do in that first issue.
And thinking about that community, like as you said, 6 contributors in the beginning, and then just growing into this space where people find connections with one another and go on trips and find out things about themselves. How did that growth actually happen, Victory?
I honestly, I wish I knew. Like it kind of like baffles me sometimes, but in a good way. Like like I said, I released the first issue and it was kind of a jam-packed issue. It was quite thick and it was smaller, but it was like, I'm doing this because I'm not going to do it again. I've done zines before. I did them in Scotland. They were very modest, but it was like nice and fun, and it was like a nice itch to scratch. Doing it in this way, I was lucky to get funded by the local arts council in Louth. I'm from Dundalk, and I got the funding and felt, okay, well, I have to do something now. So I did this thing kind of almost reluctantly, like I'm just going to do it and see how it goes. And I might get to my family and my mom might share it with her friends and this will be good, but this is all. So for it to be able to resonate the way it did, I can't necessarily pinpoint how that happened, but it's maybe similar to what Alice had said earlier. When you give something to someone, people often respond and want to give you something back. And that's what I feel like that first issue was.
Yeah. And I think tapping into those kind of universal narratives, but also creating a space for people to talk about these things. And you spoke about kind of having a permanent space by creating this archival work, as well as a zine, as well as representing people's personal stories and connections and allowing them to express themselves. That idea of different ways, and even as you said about in your workshops, folding, that the folding is actually the beginning and it's the unlocking key into the space. But I might actually throw the questions open to the floor to see if anybody has any questions for Victory.
Something I was really interested to ask about is your work in the HSE. I know you're a content designer. Have you thought about, and you're talking about research, the idea of food in health and the arts in the health space. I'm just thinking about when people go into hospital and the kinds of food and how food can be healing. Have you thought about ways of bringing the other side of your identity as a HSE? Have you thought about bringing those things together?
Yeah, it's been interesting. So I've been working with CHO6, Kildare, sort of this area of hospitals and spaces, and they're working on an intercultural cookbook, and that's been really fun. So next month I will be in Kildare, I guess, for the first time, to talk about my work with BIA, but also to kind of introduce this work that they've been doing and the intersection of culture, food, health, because they are hospitals and they think a lot about nutrition and health. And that's really exciting. I've been able to contribute a little bit to that process. And what I found really interesting is we've had conversations around this intersection of culture and health, and like, how do we not distill someone's recipe and cultural knowledge around their food into caloric figures? Because that's kind of where you want to think about. You're working with dietitians and nutritionists. They want to think about, like, how do we replace the ghee in this with like olive oil? It's like, it doesn't work. You can't do that. And that was really fun to kind of encourage them and challenge them a little bit, to be like, what do we do to someone's food? And there's nothing wrong with adaptation inherently, but what do you do to someone who's sent in their food based off the fact that they're allowed to send in their cultural heritage, food about their cultural heritage, and then you strip it back in this way? And that was fun, and they're not doing that anymore, and I'm like, win. But yeah, I am, there's moments for it that I consider ways that they could intersect, and I'd love to explore it a little bit more. But I've been doing the science and health thing for so long, and I am enjoying this foray into kind of thinking through other ways of, I don't know, navigating the world and thinking through the world. So I might just leave the whole science thing and health thing. I've done my mom proud for now. So
That's super, because I was actually just about to ask the exact opposite question. How has the science piece influenced this piece?
Yeah.
It's really exciting that you're in that space of exploration around the zines and what it can mean for your work and your identity and how you work with communities. Thank you, Victory. Are there any other questions?
Thanks very much. I love the words that you used about a living archive. To me, an archive is dusty and something that sits on a shelf. So it's wonderful to hear you. It's today, it's now, it's what's happening in Ireland. Amazing. I suppose there was a question I actually had as well for Alice about languages. I work in a secondary school, huge amount of languages. Sometimes I feel I'm in a different country, or I could be at the airport. So it's a lovely way to actually engage people and talking about their food, and it's something we do in the school ourselves. So my question really is about languages and where we stand with translations and valuing text, valuing written and spoken languages, whether it's Chinese, Arabic, and how you could bring that perhaps into a new level within your zines.
Yeah. For me, well, first and foremost, one of the things I always say to the contributors is you can submit in any language. We can do this in any language that you want. So there's some Spanish going on in the zine. Not much else. I think what you find with the zine is that when people are so used to kind of repressing, you have to remind people that you can do what, like, you're allowed to speak your language here, and it's very hard. I remember someone had submitted something and it was about, they wrote about their food, but everything was in brackets with like, this is an explanation of how you can contextualize this food, like it's, whatever, like mashed potatoes, blah, 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 blah. I was like, you don't have to do this. You delete the brackets. This is my editor hat. Now I get to edit and tell you to delete the brackets. Like, you can just say the word, and if someone like, we can explain things. I have no issue with explanations, but it's just like you speak in the way that feels natural to you. Like, you don't need to perform whatever it is that you're performing when you're presenting it to the zine, and same with language. Even with the workshops, the ones at Hugh Lane, it was people from direct provision, so we had people across different language spectrums, and it was really interesting. I don't speak any other language. I understand one, Igbo, but I don't speak it, that's a whole different conversation. But it was interesting with people speaking in different languages, because it's just like, I understand what it means to be able to express something better in a different language, because I understand another language, and the way stuff is expressed in Igbo can be so much, it's nuanced. Like something like saying I love you is not I love you, but it's like I see you with my eyes, and it's a whole different thing, and people express it very, very differently. And so I welcome whatever way you choose to express it, and if you can maybe distill it, or give me the what is the message here, in a way that I can understand, then I can submit it. I'll let it pass. I'll let it happen in the zine. And I think just people, naturally what I found with a lot of immigrants, like I said, we want to make people understand what's going on with us, and I'm a big fan of that. Like, I'm okay with being like, this is how this happens for me in my culture. We want to make people understand, and it's a natural thing. I think it's very different whenever you have someone that's kind of not taking that interest in you, and you feel like you have to explain to sort of validate something, as opposed to explain out of like a sense of like, I'm taking great joy in sharing something with you. It's two totally different things. So when it comes to language, I'm like, you don't need to validate. So don't feel like you need to present this in English or tell me this, because I will not consider you if you do not. Share it with me if you want to, in a way that I can understand. And yeah, it happens. It always happens. People will tell you, like, they will give me the Spanish, and they will also always naturally give me a form of the English or whatever, right? But it's so totally different than when someone feels like they have to tell you, because if they don't tell you or present this to you in English, then you will just write them off. That's a whole different brain space. And I think even in schools, I remember when I was younger, taking the lunch bag, for example, with food, it's totally different if I come in with my food that quote unquote smells, and I feel like I have to hide this, because if I don't, you'll write me off, as opposed to I feel like I want to share this with you, because you've kind of created this safety, this sense of like, I can come with my language, with my food, with my different culture, and you are like, I will not be penalized or ostracized because of this. And I think you learn a lot from that. I've learned a lot. I've learned so much through Beazine. I always say, when you're Nigerian, you're Nigerian. Everyone else is Nigerian unless stated otherwise. I do not know anything about any other culture in Ireland, honestly, and I've been here for so long. So it's not because I'm an immigrant that I'm like a custodian of all cultures. That's just not the case. I know about Nigeria. That's it. The cultures that have come into the zine, I'm like, so you guys have communities here too? This is crazy. Like, there's stories in there from people from sort of like the Middle East, Libya, Syria and stuff, that came here in the 80s or beyond that, who came here like as like teachers and stuff in the 80s. Blew my mind. I did not know that was a thing. You asked me about the immigrant history in Ireland, I'd be like, I feel like it's new, because all the Nigerians came in like 99, 2000. So in my head, everyone's come in 2000, but that's just not the case. And you learn so much from that experience of just creating a safety and allowing people to share what they feel like they're comfortable sharing with you.
And exciting to map that. And I loved your use of the word cartography. And that specific consideration is such a beautiful thought, and how it maps. But what we might do now, just before the lunchtime, is give some time to discussion. And what I might challenge you to do, if you don't mind, is if you've come with someone here today, to maybe pop up and go to another space. We're going to have 3 different groups. I think we'll stick with 3. And we'll have one here, one here, one here. And just to mix up and maybe meet somebody that you haven't had a chance to meet today. And we're going to go through a number of questions, but we can also chat about whatever comes up for you that you would like to bring to the table. And lunch will be served at 1. Thank you. Thank you, Victory. That was super.